Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday Leading Change episode this week with Helen Garcia. Hi Helen, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. So Wednesday is the change management, or as I like to call it, change leadership aspect of the Scrum Master role. We want to focus on a story, a change journey, a change moment, a change process you were involved with. Could be personal, individual, or, team or organizational change. But walk us through the steps, walk us through that story and the steps that you have gone through in order to bring that change leadership to the team or the individuals you were working with.
Yeah, so I think, it's a fundamental part of our role as Scrum Masters to act as that organisational change agent. And I find sometimes that's slightly forgotten. But this is actually one of my favourite parts, and I think of the role is that we are able to go in and change organisations and influence in a way that is going to bring better value sooner, safer, just as Jon Smart quotes. So I've been involved in a few teams that have either been from the very beginning of their journey, introducing this Agile mindset and introducing different ways of being able to use that, but also coming into teams where actually they're fully developed already. When I say fully developed, obviously we're all still on that on a journey, but they've got the experience and they've worked together as a team for a long period of time. So in terms of bringing change and things, I think there's a couple of different ways that we can do it, and I think there's actually a oversight. So I want to come from it from sort of a step back to say why. And often the way that I look at it is use the tools and the techniques that we already have. So as a Scrum Master and as somebody who we have incremental, iterative ways of approaching products and features and the way that we deliver those. So let's use that in the same sense to actually deliver and make change within organisations. So one way that I have done that in the past and actually continue to do that is almost make my own backlog. So not forcing change upon people, but making those observations that I've talked about a few times in the week is like stepping back. Okay, so what is it that we need to look at as a team, and making sort of that list of like key areas within the organisation that I'm observing that perhaps don't always align with some of the values and the principles of Agile. And then prioritizing those. It seems very simple, but I'm all about making things simple, over complicating them or making them over complex. So prioritize those and say, actually, what is it that is going to bring value for these individuals, teams, and the organization? What can we do now? And then at those dailies that you have, observe what is it that you can sort of guide and coach the team through by sort of asking those powerful questions in order to recognize any sort of anti-patterns that may have developed, and especially within a new team, because often as human beings there's quite a lot of scientific research about how we take old things that we've learned and trying to transform them into that new way of working. Now, that doesn't always work. In fact, the whole idea of it, Agile is that changing that mindset of the way that we deliver, and that's the hardest part. So from this, understanding like that continuous improvement, that change in progress, and following that framework. So you're not reinventing things, and then understanding from a retro, like an internal retro from myself, of actually how is it that I've done in this and how is it the team's done in that, and just doing that sort of by myself and understanding the changes and what I can try next time to perhaps make that change or influence or guide the organisation as an organisational change agent.
I like how organized you put those steps together. Definitely. And also very practical, right? Like making your own backlog, making things simple and prioritizing the ideas, using the data, what you've observed, and then thinking about what are the small experiments we can introduce. And as you said, many will not work, but it's fine. We'll try another thing. Like, I like that approach. Also because it brings us to one thing, at least in my mind, which is critical in change, which is you act as the example. Like, Scrum Masters are leaders, and the way they act with the team is an example for the team on how to act with themselves and the stakeholders. So I really like that approach. And from my perspective, at least, it's this example of bringing that mindset with us wherever we go and accepting that the change is constant, that we are on as you said, a continuous improvement journey. That for me are the key takeaways. Of course, obviously, you've developed this approach over the years. So for our listeners, like, what are maybe some of the most important impacts you've observed from starting to take that agile mindset, that incremental and iterative mindset, into how you interact with the teams, in this case, specifically on a change process?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that patience for change, and recognizing that if by you imposing your idea, if people don't want to pick up on the idea, that's fine, because it's something you've sort of touched on. It's about, the team being able to develop it within themselves. I think in the early days, I'd make my sort of backlog list and my prioritizations, and it would be like, if they haven't done it this way, then, we're doomed. But actually, it's really not about that at all. It's about making that guidance. So I think patience is really, really key as a Scrum Master, because everybody develops in a different way. Everybody grows in a completely different way. And we've touched on this already, but being able to recognize that and accept, just because your idea hasn't been taken, you know what, I see that now as, a big positive, because it means the team are actually at that point where they're like, you know what, we can bring our own thoughts, our own ideas. It's not just about having an influence on that, because actually it's for them to decide. So I think a key area is that patience. If you're like me and you want to make the backlog and prioritizing, that's good, but don't stick to that way of doing stuff. And if it doesn't work, that's totally fine. And recognize where the team does need to change. Recognize where the team needs to recognize things within themselves as well. So what you've observed isn't necessarily the needs of the team. So be very open, have an open mindset, have open observations, and be really cognizant of that. So this is what I would take as my key takeaway from the learnings over the years. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you have a tip on how to keep ourselves grounded and patient?
What I do a lot, actually, is before I go into whether it's a daily or whether it's a sprint planning session, retro, whatever it might be, is to take time for myself. So if that's 5 minutes before a meeting, that's okay. Self-reflect and say, you know what, this time is actually for the team that I'm going to be doing. I'm serving the team. Don't rush from one meeting to another meeting or one conversation to another. And it sounds hard, and it is hard to be able to give yourself that buffer time. But that's made a big difference, I think, to the way that I come to these environments. And actually, I know that I've had that 5 minutes, or if you can even take 10 or 15 minutes to read something and to quiet your own mind before you go into another situation where you're trying to serve the team. I'd highly recommend that. Just try it, just give it a go, try it out, experiment, because it certainly worked for me.
Absolutely. That's a great recommendation. Thank you for sharing that, Helen.
Thank you so much.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.